Welcome, everyone. Thanks for coming to the mHealth special session, 20 Questions to an Open Architecture. I'm the director of mHealth, David Haddad. We have an exciting panel for you today with some great partners we've been working with and a couple of patients that have really dedicated their time to really help make the open mHealth architecture a reality. From the outset, we want to thank our sponsors. Thank you to the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation's Pioneer Portfolio. We want to thank the McKesson Foundation and the Vodafone Americas Foundation, in addition to Rock Health for their media partnership to really helping make our presence at the summit happen. Thank you. And just at the outset, if you're tweeting this session, our handle is OpenMHealth, and the hashtag is OpenMHealth, or #OpenMHealth. And if you're interested in going to the website while we're talking, go to openmhealth.org, and you can also check out our new developer website, developer.openmhealth.org. So, raise of hands, how many people know what OpenMHealth is? Wow. If you haven't, come to booth 216 and you can learn more. But for those who know a little something or don't know anything at all, OpenMHealth started back in September of 2011 as a nonprofit funded by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. It started with the premise of really helping to integrate different applications and data so that we can actually make applications more effective. Today, applications are built in silos. They're built in these sort of streams of data that are very hard to connect together. And through the efforts and the work that we've done with our technical partners over the last year and a few months, we've been able to help make this open architecture a reality. We're going to, just a little bit, some logistics of what's going to happen today so that we all know, so there's no surprises. We're going to be starting out with a couple of case studies, and you can, if you've been to our booth, you might have seen some of these case studies, but we wanted to help explain it a little bit more from the real stories of our partners. The first case study we're going to begin with is, after this case study, we'll bring on another group of our partners to go over the diabetes case study. But the first is around PTSD. Just a brief overview. I mean, you see on the far left, you see a number of different applications like Ginger.io and Intel's Mood Map and PTSD Explorer and Kaiser's My Meds and Microsoft Health Vault. These apps individually are great, but the real power of using the open architecture is that we could take those applications and use the open APIs and the open protocols that we've been building over the last year, bring them out up into the cloud, and then visualize them in a meaningful way so that a patient and their clinician can have a conversation to really understand how that patient is improving or not, and so that we can get to the meaningful results that the patients need to get healthy. We're going to begin with Joe. We're going to be beginning with Brian. He's a veteran from, served in Afghanistan and works for the VA. I'll let him introduce himself a little bit more as well. But for the intents and purposes of our presentation, we're calling him Joe, just for, for those reasons. So Brian will introduce himself and talk a little bit about the experience that he's had with OpenMHealth. Good afternoon. Oh, you can come up. It's not. It's not. Is it on? No.
Good afternoon. I'm Brian Venrick, or a.k.a. Joe Smith. Like mentioned earlier, I was in Afghanistan 06-07, and I got involved when one of my friends who actually works with Julia called me and asked me if I would be interested in volunteering for this study, and I, of course, wanted to help my fellow veterans who I've shared my apps with when I'm at because I'm still a current drilling member for the Army Reserves. I share my apps with them, seeing what they think about it. And also, as an employee of Veterans Health Administration, I feel that if I didn't get involved, I wouldn't be a great employee because, one, I need to make sure I'm always supporting the veterans because I am one and because that is my customer at my federal civilian job. And so my experience were great because I got to see it firsthand and got to experience it, and seeing it on both ends, from being here, seeing the results of my data, and just seeing how it can improve my life and other veterans, and I can just see this going forward and helping veterans.
Thanks, Joe, or Brian.
I'll answer both.
So we're going to start out by talking a little bit about the PTSD Explorer application. So initially, when we started last year, we worked with Julia, Dr. Hoffman. I don't know, we call you
Julia's fine.
Julia's fine. I never get that right. So we worked with Julia since last year on trying to take the application that her and her team built called PTSD Coach, and being able to take the data that was on the phone, and Julia could explain a little bit more, and bring it up using the into visualization with processing units and visualization units using the open mHealth architecture. So I'll let Julia explain a little bit about who she is, how she was involved with open mHealth, and kind of give the lowdown.
So my name is Julia Hoffman. I am a doctor, but I don't insist anybody recognize that publicly. I was the developer of the PTSD Coach app, which is publicly available and has been since April of 2011. And I'm the mobile apps lead for mental health for the VA. Essentially what we did was we built an app for PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, which is the most common mental health problem among veterans and service members returning from deployments. And we were trying to address a couple of problems that are significant in our system, one of which is the stigma that people experience and that makes them not want to enter care. So there are many other reasons that we made the app as well, but for that reason we had to make it entirely anonymous. It's entirely unconnected to any kind of VA or DoD informatics systems. And it served its purpose as that. It's been downloaded over 80,000 times in 73 countries now, and it's been versioned by a number of countries for their own veterans. So overall, the app has been relatively successful, but some of the negative feedback that we received and even had internally in our team is that it made it virtually impossible to bring into care in a meaningful way and to enhance clinical care. So an app that's unconnected not only can't be used meaningfully in clinical care, but it also can't be used to alongside other apps particularly meaningfully. So what we wanted, we understand that the veterans with PTSD have a whole host of problems, and or potentially have a whole host of problems, and we didn't want to start a process where we're giving them one app for each problem that they potentially have that are entirely unconnected, and with their clinician needing to interact with data from each of those different apps. We found Open mHealth just as they were sort of starting up, and it was a perfect marriage because they needed an app and we needed an open solution that was non-proprietary and that would actually be best for our veterans in terms of secure solutions that we could then use to create even more products that would align with the Open mHealth solution.
Great.
I guess this is an image of PTSD Coach and PTSD Explorer. There are two things that we did with Open mHealth, or that Open mHealth did with us. The first is to create the Explorer version of PTSD Coach, which basically is just the instrumented version of the app. So it looks almost identical to the original app. The only difference is there's a logon screen, so there's a username and password, so it's associated with a single patient or user, and all of the data, so usage data and all of the survey data is being sent back through the system that Open mHealth has architected to an ohmage server. And the second piece of what they did was create the visualization tool, the web-based visualization tool that can be used by the clinician, which we'll see shortly, and which was the crux of my work with Brian, Joe.
So we're going to pass the mic around to John Madison from Kaiser Permanente. John, could you talk a little bit about who you are, what the MyMyMeds application, as well as why Open mHealth is so important to that application, and what you see, what you hope to get out of Open mHealth for the future?
Sure. So Kaiser Permanente has the benefit of a real visionary pioneer by the name of Sidney Garfield, who envisioned highly integrated care delivery and highly integrated systems in support of that care delivery. The only thing that he didn't envision that was not a part of it in his original publication 50 years ago was mobile. And so we are very deeply involved in mobilizing Sidney Garfield's vision and trying to bring the same level of integration and interoperability that he envisioned for everything else that we've done. And it's very clear that amongst the tens of thousands of apps that have been developed for health and wellness, there isn't a single standalone killer app, that there is going to be an ecosystem, and the ecosystem needs to be able to interoperate. And back to what Julia was saying about, you know, there are a lot of people who have more than one condition, and you don't want to prescribe one app per condition, first and foremost. And secondly, you don't want to have different behavioral paradigms and different semantic representations in those apps, because as Brian Dolan of Mobile Health News observed in his most recent column, the uptake of mobile health apps has been hampered by the lack of integration between the consumer and the provider. So if you look at those use cases and the potential for bringing about an integrated behavioral framework, what I like to refer to as a behavioral framework for wellness that spans both health and disease management, into a cohesive environment, a cohesive user experience, there has to be some mechanism for commonality. And so when I discovered what the Open mHealth folks were doing around providing platform and semantic interoperability, and with my interest in really applying that on a large scale, and given that most of the smart people in the world don't work for any one of us, there are going to be lots of different apps from different vendors that will be best of breed. And so to the extent that there is some frame of reference where they can interoperate at a platform, a semantic, and ultimately at a behavioral level, we'll be really servicing what individual consumers are looking for in terms of managing their life, which includes their health and their wellness. And so we already had a medication management application called MyMeds, and knowing what Open mHealth was doing, we donated that app into the open source world to allow it to become part of that ecosystem, and the folks at this table have done a brilliant job of using it, and I'll explain that more in a bit.
So Julia, I mean, you see this data view right here where you see the MyMeds medication variable included in this data visualization. Could you talk a little bit about that and sort of how that, what that means in terms of Brian's care?
Yeah, so the constant reminder is really useful for those who are forgetful. Life interferes with best laid plans, and medication management is a critical part often of psychiatric management. In the case of Brian, he had an injury. He was taking an antidepressant for PTSD. He had an injury at one point. This is all a vignette, by the way. He was taking an antidepressant. He went on a deployment where he started taking more of his anti-anxiety medication that is usually just used as needed, which was impacting his mood negatively, and then injured himself on that deployment, mini deployment, and had to start taking Tylenol 3, which is a pain medication, and was interfering with the anti-anxiety medication. And so what we found was we had this additional stream of data that I could easily see when meeting with him was impacting his mood and his energy level. And so it was an interesting piece of data, and one that I, as a psychologist, because I'm not prescribing the medications, may not have actually identified if I hadn't had this data view in front of me. Great.
You know, one of the important things about how we live our lives is that there's not one app that's going to be able to solve any one problem for you, and it's about how do you integrate these together so you can actually tell how a person is living in the world that they live in. And so I want to jump next to Margaret Morris from Intel Labs, and maybe you could talk a little bit about yourself and about Mood Map and how that was integrated into the Open mHealth community.
So I'm also a clinical psychologist and technology researcher at Intel, and I do work on how technology can foster interpersonal connectedness, largely through emotional expression and emotional self-awareness. And the mood map is one of the tools that I made with design and engineering colleagues at Intel. And it's a very, like a super simple UI that was intended to foster some pretty complex processes of emotional awareness and self-regulation, as well as empathy. And our goal in working with mHealth is for others to take advantage of the user experience research that we did, and so others don't have to reinvent that. I think also this tool becomes interesting when it's integrated with contextual awareness, so that you start to learn about how emotions vary in different social circumstances or different locations, how it varies depending on physiological functioning as picked up by sensors, or how different kinds of mood patterns can be understood in light of physical conditions, or in light of how to make behavior changes in the service of either preventing or managing a chronic disease. So there's such a broad range of projects that can be taken up in very innovative ways in light of mobile capabilities now, and they're certainly beyond what I can do or what one research lab can do. And so we really want to work with other partners of mHealth to innovate. And I think not only mHealth, but the future of mobile technology relies on this kind of it's quite modular experimentation. So that's what we're really interested in.
Thank you.
And this, I don't know if we can,
I'll
just show you, like this, on the left here is the mood map, and this is, it's based on a spatial model of emotion called the circumplex model. So it just is, on the y-axis is how energized one feels, and the x-axis is the valence, or how negative or positive. And the idea is throughout the day, people simply touch to express their feelings, and then you can see on the right is like a visualization of mood patterns over time.
Very cool. So Julia, why do you think PTSD patients need another mood survey?
Well, in the case of the pilot that we ran with Brian, what it gave us was a more granular view of how he was doing. You can see the weekly, so the first two columns are the mood and energy scores from Mood Map, which are multiple times per day. And then the next two columns are the PTSD assessment, the full-scale PCL, and the depression assessment, which is a PHQ-9. So you can see that he's taking the two bigger assessments weekly, and they're not capturing nearly as much data as his day-to-day mood mapping scores. So there were a couple of benefits here. First of all, we could see the places where all of a sudden the variation stops. You expect that his energy might go up and down over the course of the day, over the course of the week, his mood might go up and down. And at some point, he wasn't doing particularly well. This is actually around this, during the mini deployment, and at the same time where he was using medications further down than that, using red, there you go. Yeah. Using more medications than he was intended to. So we could see that all of a sudden he was sort of bottoming out and staying pretty constant, which was unexpected, and gave us an opportunity to talk. Also, I don't want to speak for Brian, but one of the things that he's communicated to me is that it was kind of a nice communication tool that, he knew that he was entering his scores, and that I was getting that data. So 2 to 4 times per day, he was sort of checking in with me without having to really pick up the phone and make any kind of claim that he needed my actual full attention, but more just that he knew that the scores were going to me.
Brian, do you want to talk about that just a second?
Sure. Like Dr. Hoffman said, that's really how I felt about the mood map, because the thing is throughout the day, depending on my commute, I live in, the DC metro area, so the commute can really, change your mood. So throughout the day, my mood would change different, so I could give her 2 to 4 times on an average of my mood. And the PTSD, I did a daily survey, which was once a day, and that was how I felt over the whole day. And then I called it my anniversary, which was every Wednesday, I did a longer survey, and that was my, how I felt for the whole week. But I really felt that these nonverbal communication that I was doing with the mood map and the PTSD Explorer was a way of me, checking in and letting her know how I felt without expressing myself. Because, at a young age in the military, we learn showing, you're sick is sometimes a sign of weakness, so you don't want to always admit it. So I was able to, talk to her through these nonverbals again, and not have to take off from work, not have to be on the phone with her, and she could just see how I was doing with those, looks like a bag of Skittles, and it really worked. And she would call me every Friday, and she could really see how my week was going just because of these two apps.
Oops. We talked about that. Okay, so next up, let's talk about Ginger.io. Karin, can you talk a little bit about who you are, the Ginger.io app, and sort of why mHealth and how this helps fit in the PTSD situation?
Yes, very much so. Hi, everyone. Karin Singh, a co-founder at Ginger.io. Many patients describe Ginger.io as the diary that writes itself. It's an application that runs in the background and collects statistics passively about your behavior. Things that traditionally weren't considered health information, but based on a lot of research that my co-founder was doing at the MIT Media Lab, and that we've since done with a number of provider partners around the country, have been able to take data like your calling patterns, your texting patterns, even location or accelerometer, and correlate that to health. And so in the case that Julia can speak to and Brian can speak to in just a bit, in some of our prior research in depression, which is often comorbidity for a lot of PTSD patients, we found that your communication diversity, or the number of unique people you talk to, changes when you start to feel those early signs of depression, that you isolate yourself. And that isolation shows up in how you interact with others, in the fact that maybe you normally talk to 10 people over the course of a week, and now you only talk to 2 people that you trust. And so the idea behind Ginger.io is, rather than placing a lot of burden on the patient, can your doctor, your clinician sort of prescribe this app to you, runs in the background, and in addition, and maybe complementing Mood Map and Mind My Meds, take some of that self-reported data and combine it with some of this passive data that can provide a really rich picture. So I think we sort of cheat in the next, maybe it's on the next slide, where you see just a continuous stream of information. But our goal is really, without placing a lot of burden on the patient, collecting that data and then feeding it back sort of as a red, yellow, green light to patients. So in this case, it's maybe a screenshot of my mobile app, but very quickly collecting a lot of statistics about my communication and my mobility data.
Yeah, Julia, can you talk about why communication is important for a PTSD patient?
Sure. PTSD is a disorder of avoidance. It's a disorder where the primary goal of the disordered person is to stay away from unpleasant internal stimuli. They don't want to think about the horrible thing that happened. And given that, this gave us a lot of rich data to work with. As Brian mentioned, he's not the first service member or veteran to identify that they don't really want to talk about what's going on with them. And that's kind of a hallmark of this population. And this gave us some rich data to work with, because how a patient is doing, how connected a patient is to their world, and how much they're traveling around, how much they're engaging, is a great indicator of how they're doing and their mental status. We talked a lot in our weekly sessions about using texting as sort of pseudo communication. We could see from the Ginger.io data that Brian texts quite a lot, but that he doesn't tend to answer phone calls. Or make phone calls, and that may be sort of consistent with what the trend in younger people anyway, but it was more extreme than that, and it gave us an opportunity to talk about keeping people at arm's length. It was really good clinical data, and it was an interesting barometer of his psychological functioning degrading and improving over time.
Yeah, I just wanted to show how it got rendered in the visualization. You could see here some of the calls, right? Julia, like to see how the texting kind of is blowing up compared to.
Right, so when you probably can't see the numbers from your seats, but when he was on his mini deployment and struggling and also in pain from his knee injury, all of a sudden his texting went down significantly. So even though it was still at the high end, and certainly more than his voice calls, he was doing a lot less communicating with others, which is consistent with what you just heard the expectations for depression are.
So we wanted, again, this is a conversation about how some of the technical partners have used mHealth to be able to help understand Brian's condition. And so, Julia, do you mind breaking down a bit of a diagnosis of sort of this sort of summary from this exercise?
Yeah, we had certainly increased insight into Brian's symptoms and functioning on both sides. I think he learned a lot. Does that seem true? Yes. Yeah, he learned a lot, and I learned a lot. That maybe we would have had to maybe we would have eventually gotten there, but it would have taken a lot longer in a psychotherapy to find out more of the same information and kind of get a handle on what his patterns were in interacting with others. And it led to dynamic treatment planning. There was a time when he was taking his meds, not quite inappropriately, but definitely probably not in a helpful way. And I was able to reach out between sessions, and we were able to cut off that behavior before it became even more problematic. So treatment planning could actually become more flexible, where we are really doing patient-centered care. It's tailored to who is this patient, what do they need in this moment. We had an increased sense of connection with provider, mostly from that mood map data, but probably across the board, where he knew at various times during the day that he was communicating something to me. So it's the same sort of function that putting up a Facebook status has for a lot of people, where you can understand that even if you get no response, someone is seeing the experience that you're having, and that can be meaningful. We had evidence of the processes that were keeping him stuck. So what we haven't really had a chance to talk about in this session is that miraculously, right after Thanksgiving, Brian's symptoms on PTSD and depression went down to absolutely zero, which is sort of not really expected in this scenario, except for that it's evidence of maybe some black and white thinking and so a tendency to maybe minimize symptoms in cases where he was having a good time on Thanksgiving. He wanted to feel better, and so he wanted to just sort of disavow the symptoms that he was having. And that is just grist for the mill in psychotherapy. It gives me a richer understanding of who he is and how he is managing his psychopathology. We had extra data sources to highlight otherwise unavailable clinically important information. So I would never have known that he stopped contacting people that were important to him without that Ginger.io data. I would never have known that he stopped, his mobility radius decreased, and I would never have known that his energy level was as low as it was, which is actually kind of one of the more problematic signals that we saw, and certainly that his medication usage had changed. And then finally, his safety was improved, because I could see, as I said, I gave him a call, an unplanned intervention at one point, in order to maintain his safety based on the information that I was getting about his medication usage. So really having this data at my disposal, where I could just kind of check in with the website at any time, and certainly if I had been working with more than one patient with this whole suite of apps, then I could flip through all of the patients in a sitting and make sure there was nothing alarming that I needed to address. In this case, there was at one point.
Great, thank you. Let's give him a round of applause, and we're going to be bringing up our diabetes scenario. Partners, why don't you guys come on up from diabetes? While they're the change of the guard, changing guard. We wanted to announce the winner of the mHealth quiz. Did anyone answer any of those quiz questions on Twitter or the social media outlets profiles? Well, anyway, if you're Aaron Silvius, you won a Nexus S, which you can come down to our booth, number 216, and pick it up. Is Aaron here? No. All right. Well, we will announce that on Twitter, Aaron, that you won. So we have another exciting panel for you. So a little bit of a shift. Some of the three different areas that Open mHealth tries to focus in on are mental health, wellness, and chronic disease, or as our co-founder Idison likes to call it, mind, body, and soul. We're gonna go dive deeper into how the similar sort of integration of various applications and devices can be used to manage type 1 diabetes. So why don't I let our type 1 diabetic Alex introduce herself and talk a little bit about who you are, about your condition, and sort of your experience with the Open mHealth scenario.
Sure. So my name is Alex Freeman, and in addition to having type 1 diabetes for almost 20 years now, I was diagnosed when I was 4. I'm an acute care pediatric RN at UCLA. And so I kind of got involved with mHealth because I volunteer at a diabetes summer camp every summer, and there was an endocrinologist there that I worked with pretty closely. And when he heard what I was going through at the time, which was basically extreme frustration with my diabetes management and an elevated A1C, which is a measure of how well my blood sugars are being controlled, the wheels kind of started turning. And I got an email from him a while later asking if I would like to be a part of both the mHealth case study and also Green Dot, which you will hear about shortly. At camp, I started using something called a continuous glucose monitor, which checks my blood sugar every 5 minutes. And that was kind of I've been on an insulin pump for 10 years. I'm pretty dialed in, so to speak, to the diabetes community and trying to use the best technology for my diabetes. So using the continuous glucose monitor was kind of my first eye-opening into how phenomenal technology can be. And as you'll come to see over the next few minutes as we kind of describe my experience in the last few months, that all really came to full fruition because the technology that I used through both Open mHealth and Green Dot turned out to be extremely beneficial. So it's something that I'm really excited about.
We are too. So this is just sort of visualization, just to demonstrate that we have two different visualizations that we're going to be presenting throughout the rest of the diabetes scenario. On the left is the visualization that Alex was using on her phone called My Comparisons, and on the right is a Green Dot visualization called Blip. That's a more like a clinical view that gives the entire picture of her activity and et cetera. And Aaron from Green Dot will explain a little bit more about how that works, just so that you're not confused that there's two different visualizations. So that's there. So we're going to start with Rick from Entra Health Systems. Could you talk a little bit about who you are and also just beyond just the glucometer, how do you think that Entra could be integrating with other sorts of data sources or data out there so that it can make the diabetes ecosystem richer for your growth as well as the mHealth ecosystem at large?
Sure, Dave. I'm Rick Strobridge. I'm the CEO of Entra Health Systems. We are the first CE and FDA cleared wireless blood glucose meter with a Bluetooth chip in it. And we were really pleased to be part of the Open mHealth project regarding diabetes because part of the company strategy from the very beginning has been to have an open architecture. So our meter has a completely open API in terms of command set. So that means that lots of integrators, I think we have about 400 integrators worldwide, integrating our blood glucose meter into their mHealth and telehealth application. And that's been a very important strategy to us. So I was really happy to hear about the Open mHealth organization to take it just that one step further and begin integrating all the applications that are out there from the silos that David had described earlier. So I think it's really going to benefit not only Entra Health, because, like I said, our strategy has been open from the very beginning, but also the entire industry. I mean, I think that this industry is really really on the cusp of having a really solid consumer-facing bent, something that's meaningful to engage the consumers in the care, which I personally believe, I've been doing telehealth since 1995, believe it or not, which I really believe will engage the consumer and thereby get both the payers and providers on board.
Great, thanks, Rick. So in addition to the Entra health system, I mean, we also have been working with the TuneNet platform and Qualcomm Life. And so maybe, Kabir, could you talk a little bit about yourself and Qualcomm Life and sort of how does that connect with Entra and just sort of this open mHealth ecosystem at large?
Sure, thanks, David. I'm Kabir Kaskar. I'm part of the Qualcomm Life business development team. Qualcomm Life is a wholly owned subsidiary of Qualcomm, and our focus is on mobilizing healthcare. Entra is actually a very good partner of ours. The focus for us is how do we reduce healthcare costs and how do we improve connectivity using wireless. So we've built a platform called TuneNet, which stands for To the Internet, and its intent is really simple. It's to break down the silos across applications, devices, and services so that you have one unified biometric stream that can be provided to enterprises, to physicians, and to end users as well. So when we were looking at this, and in the context of this specific use case, the TuneNet hub was used. Essentially, it's a little night light that plugs in the wall, and it's got multiple radios in it. When you look at the market today, it's very fragmented, and there's so many different radios trying to connect multiple devices with each other. So the TuneNet hub tries to capture most of the common radios. It has Bluetooth low energy, Wi-Fi, and plus it's got a USB port for additional radios that you can add, or even cable connect a specific biometric sensor to it. And from a wireless technology perspective, it's got a wireless 3G chip in it, so that you don't actually need Wi-Fi at home. You can simply plug it in and connect it. In the context of this diabetes use case, the concept is really simple from a TuneNet hub perspective. There's no installation instruction that comes with the hub. All you do is plug it in the wall, and that's it. Anytime that an Entra glucometer reading is taken, that glucometer is already prepared to work with the hub. So the reading transmits via Bluetooth to the TuneNet hub and then wirelessly sends the data back through our platform onward to the visualization tool. So for us, it was really important to keep it as seamless as possible, because ultimately you're already asking a lot from the end user to take their readings on a regular basis. We wanted to make sure that the connectivity was simple and seamless to the end user.
Alex, did you know that?
Yes, I did, and I do even more now.
Great. I mean, maybe we could have Alex and Aaron talk a little bit about this, but I mean, could you talk about how the my comparisons, visualization, and sort of comparing blood glucose to things like mood and other sort of variables that are out there? Could you talk a little bit about that?
So my comparisons is the open mHealth visualization for me to trend all my data against one another. So of course blood sugar is the way that I'm measuring whether or not these things are valuable to me. So if I can improve my blood sugar control, then I would see it as valuable. So through my comparisons, I could ask for it to trend any of those variables. So my glucose to my food to see am I having blood sugar spikes after certain meals, my glucose to my exercise. This part was on my phone, and it was kind of a very simple breakdown of that. And then Aaron next to me here will also get into a lot more detail about Green Dot, which was kind of a visualization, taking it to the next level in terms of managing your diabetes and having a really great visualization tool to do so. So
actually, Aaron, why don't we jump into this a little bit? We found this really interesting. I think this whole idea between the Entra blood glucose reading and the Animas insulin pump, and just sort of being the co-founder of Green Dot as well as an endocrinologist, describing sort of this discrepancy a little bit, and what does that mean to you?
Yeah. So, hi everyone. I'm Aaron 19, as he said. I'm actually still a fellow in endocrinology at UCSF, and co-founder of Green Dot Diabetes. And I think what this visualization shows is how, working with mHealth, we're trying to solve what's a major frustration and headache in diabetes care today for patients and for physicians, which is, as my colleagues down the line here were talking about, we just have these vertical silos of data, and clinicians and patients don't really care or respect those boundaries. We just want the information so that we can do our job. And so being forced into artificially determined silos really hinders that. And so mHealth and forward thinkers like Rich at Entra and Qualcomm with TueNet have really facilitated us in breaking down those barriers and providing a visualization that will really help us establish connections with our patients and help the patients establish connections to their data. So what we're looking at here, you have I'm sorry?
This top part here? Or
really anywhere. But yeah, the top part there. So the top part of the graph there are patients' blood sugars, so green dots obviously represent normal blood sugars, and you have the arrows pointing up in color that are representing high blood sugars. And what we're seeing here in orange are Alex's glucose values from her Entra glucometer compared to what she's entering in to her insulin pump. So one of the things that would have happened, and I learned this from Alex recently just through this experience, is that patients, when they enter their blood, they check their blood sugar, enter it into their insulin pump, they may not always remember exactly what the number was. And so because we have multiple devices feeding in to the same visualization, we're really able to cross-reference and check the validity of the data and gain some insights that we wouldn't have been able to have before.
Thank you. Yeah. In addition to, while Body Media is not present with us today, in addition to the A&D scale and the Entra glucometer and the TueNet hub, Alex also used the Body Media armband, which helped to describe her calories, right? It was calories and sleep that measured that as well. It was brought into the visualizations. So, Aaron, what do you? What do sleeping patterns really reveal, you think, with diabetes and looking at this type 1 scenario?
Well, to be honest, we don't know yet. But what I think one of the powerful possibilities with comparing all this data is that we're going to be able to tease out relationships that we might not have known that were there, and we'll really be able to. I know Ida, Dr. Sim talks a lot about N of 1 medicine, and I think, population health has its limitations. Everyone's a little bit different, so we might be able to allow patients to discover for themselves what their relationships are.
Great. So next up, why don't we bring it over to JP and talk a little bit about PAM and what you're doing there and sort of how you got involved with mHealth and sort of what do you see as the connection between PAM and the rest of the ecosystem?
Sure. So I'm JP Pollack. I'm a researcher at Cornell University and Weill Cornell Medical College. In my research, mostly what I do is work with clinicians to help them develop mobile applications which either help them collect self-report data from patients or intervene on different things in their daily lives. The example that I'll talk about today is an application or really a method that I developed called PAM, which is the photographic affect meter. And the idea behind PAM is that one of the things that's really important for clinicians to assess in the daily lives of their patients in a really broad range of diseases and conditions is the emotional state, or how the patient is feeling, something that we generally refer to as affect. So typically when you want to measure affect, you give someone a very long questionnaire. There's standard ones such as PALMS or PANIS, which range from 5 to 20 questions. There's various scales that you can use which rely on different levels of understanding of what emotion and affect is. But what we wanted to do was get that down to something that patients could take multiple times a day. And you're not going to fill out a 20-item survey 4 times a day or even once a day probably. So what we did was we went through sort of a long process which I won't bore you with, but we ended up with a visual scale for emotion. And what this is, it's a set of images there's about 48 images, we're in the process of doubling that randomly get drawn and displayed on a 16-item grid. When one of the subjects clicks on one of those images, we're able to ascertain from that what their present emotional state is. And in the time since we've developed it, we've undergone numerous validation processes to be able to say with a fair amount of certainty that the results that are generated from PAM are on par with those generated from any number of the gold standard measures of affect that you want to use. So the way that this sort of fits in with all of this is, from my perspective, mHealth offers me, two things which are essential. So the measurement of emotion or the use of emotion in clinical research or research in general really depends on it being linked with other types of data. Emotional data in and of itself is not that interesting, but when you start to compare it to what's going on in people's lives, the decisions they're making, their health status, their health outcomes, that's when things become really good. So in my own research, it's just an unbelievable step in the right direction to be able to very easily link it with all sorts of other data sources. And on the other side of the coin, as someone who's developing these tools, it's of course of my interest to be able to allow other researchers to be able to use them too. So the fact that anyone working within this ecosystem can simply drop in my method or app is just, that's a big plus.
Definitely. I mean, I usually feel like this after I drink coffee, like a cat, which is great. But I mean, it's sort of an obvious point. But I mean, Aaron, can you talk a little bit about mood and sort of how that affects, or blood glucose might affect mood?
I think probably better to ask Alex's siblings and her parents about that one. Your mood is reflected when your blood sugar changes. It's reflected in your mood. So, we know this, and now we can see it. But when your blood sugar goes really high or really low, you're just not going to be yourself. So actually, I guess that offers an interesting opportunity to send like a warning flag. Just thought of this now, send a warning to your loved ones that, that a bad mood is brewing.
Again, in addition to the number of different apps and devices, we also wanted to track and see how Alex's activity was influencing her blood glucose levels and her management of her care by using Runkeeper in a similar way to the other devices and applications that we have today. Aaron, could you talk a little bit? I mean, we know activity is an important variable to monitor as a type 1 diabetic and manage, but could you talk a little bit about the differences between maybe running and walking compared to, and how that affects blood glucose?
Yeah, so I think this gets back to what we were talking about earlier with individuality versus populations, where we know in general how people respond to exercise with their blood sugars, but this allows each individual patient to be able to see how they respond, rather than us, saying as a whole population, this is how people respond. So I think one of the things Alex has been exploring is when she does light activity versus heavy activity or specific kinds of activity that her blood sugar may respond in a slightly different pattern. And we're able to use quick feedback loops because we're getting the data, not waiting for an office visit 3 months later. We're able to get quick feedback loops and try to tinker with her regimen and make some changes.
And she puts us all to shame by running for 110 minutes. So.
Yeah.
Again, so ohmage is, you've probably seen this word ohmage used many times throughout this panel and presentation. So ohmage was being used as a data store to be able to integrate all these various applications. But in addition to that, it also is an application for mobility that can understand mobility in the context of diabetes and other conditions. So, I guess we did talk about moderate activity. You want to talk a little bit about that too, Aaron? About moderate activity with
Sure. Well, I think that the main point here is, and Alex can tell us exactly what she was doing at this time, but you can see as David's highlighting, those little yellow squares are moderate activity. The little red one next to it is intense activity, and you can see her blood sugar is really coming down just from those yellow squares. And I think you were at work that day, right? Yeah. So she was just at work, walking around, and you can see the effect that it had on her blood sugars. So I think, Alex has experienced this, but we're just trying to help patients make a real personal connection to their data and go beyond just data to really learning informative facts about themselves and how they respond.
Yeah, that's two different activity data sources. Yeah, so it's looking at, you want to talk about a little bit about this, Alex? I mean, the difference.
Sure. So this is just showing when I input my data on Runkeeper, that populates in one area on Green Dot. And then the mobility capability of ohmage also generates the yellow movement. So if I'm carrying the phone on my person, it's going to tell me whether I'm walking, driving, running, or sedentary. So it was just kind of an interesting, it's phenomenal that I can see all that in one spreadsheet with my blood sugar among all this other data, because I can get really detailed in my analysis, or if I don't have that capability, let's say I weren't a nurse and hadn't had diabetes for very long, Erin could make that analysis for me. So that's kind of what we want to prove in this slide, is that the value of seeing both those things.
Yeah, and the granularity of those as well. And this is the blip visualization from Green Dot. And as you could see here, you see all of these various variables all in one place. You want to talk about that, Erin, a little bit? Or?
Yeah, so I think this just gets to the point Alex was just making, that we're trying to be helpful to patients at all health literacy levels. So the views we were looking at before were a much more detailed view, diving into your hour-by-hour glucose management, and this is a 2-week view of all of your blood sugars. So really quickly you can spot patterns, in how you are different times of day. So even someone with a low health literacy level can make connections and say, oh, I notice, right in the middle of the day there at the bottom of the screen, she's got a sort of vertical bar of purple arrows going up. So you can say that she's always high at that time of day and start to look into why that might be.
Can I add something, David?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
You want to go back for a second? Oh. I just wanted to add one thing, because this is my favorite slide. I've looked at a lot of data with a lot of different upload systems, and most of them are really overwhelming and confusing. But I really like this shot because you see all the red and magenta kind of there at the end of November, and then you start to see more green and yellow towards the top when we get into the first few days of December. And according to Colored Green Means Go, that you can really, does amazing visualization of the increased control I had over my blood sugars after being able to really look at this data and use it, because it's simple and I could make the adjustments with the help of my care provider. So it's a pretty phenomenal layout.
Yeah, I mean, again, we're talking about, about that, the days, and like the 23rd and the 22nd is sort of after Thanksgiving, which is quite interesting. And so looking at, one of the things that you want to talk a little bit about sort of food and how you were able to see that and kind of monitor and manage that with your diabetes?
Yeah, so as you could imagine, carb counting is an ongoing struggle. And a lot of times when you show up to your healthcare provider, they want to know, well, what was it that you ate on November 25th that caused that blood sugar of 500? And no one knows that ever, or wouldn't be expected to. So through ohmage, I was tracking everything I put in my mouth in terms of grams of carbohydrate, how full I felt after, all these things. And if you click on the little comment bubbles, that all shows up. In addition to that, through Green Dot, I have a Facebook group that I can post in whenever I feel the need or if I have a question. So this was kind of a funny discussion that we had on Thanksgiving, where I took a picture of my Thanksgiving meal, and then Erin, myself, and another doctor named Dr. Adi all took stabs at how many grams of carbohydrates we thought I was going to consume on Thanksgiving. And it actually I had a pretty good outcome for it. So it's a pretty amazing interface to be able to talk to your practitioners like that, and then to retrospectively look at data and get really important information.
Yeah, so we've talked about a number of different apps and devices all being integrated to be able to help Alex manage her care, and also her clinician to really help understand how she's living her life and to be able to help her in her everyday. I mean, Erin, do you mind summarizing some of the diagnosis that, or maybe giving a doctor's diagnosis on from this scenario?
Sure. It's actually interesting because I think the slide could almost be the same one as Julia had before in the PTSD scenario, because I think that the parallels are really phenomenal due to the powers of what we can do with Open mHealth and bringing all these different applications together. So I think one of the things, and she touched on this, was accountability. So just like Brian/Joe, Alex knows that the data is being collected, and so there's some inherent power in that, and she knows that we're gonna hold her accountable when she comes to see us in clinic. One of the other things that's happened, and Alex already talked about this, is that just in using this for the last several weeks, her blood sugar control has actually improved quite dramatically, and so she's now feeling it more often when she gets a low blood sugar, which is actually a really important thing for diabetics. What else? Yeah, this monitor's out.
Oh, oh no, sorry.
I'm trying to read through you here.
Oh.
So, and you know, the last point on there, I think, is probably the most important, which is self-learning. I was talking to Alex on the phone last week, and she was saying how she, you know, through this experience has really been able to fine-tune her diabetes control. And she's, you know, like she said, she's a nurse. She's had diabetes since she was 4 years old. And in the last 3 weeks, using all of these different tools, she's really made so much more of a powerful impact on her daily habits, on her behavior, and her self-management of diabetes. It's just the power of what we can do when we bring all these things together is really phenomenal. So we're really excited about the potential.
Well, thank you very much. We'll have some time for questions, and please go to openmhealth.org, follow us on all the social profiles that we have, and check out the developer.openmhealth.org site so you can learn how to actually integrate the OpenmHealth API and architecture into your own application as well, and take this, you know, improve health. Thank you very much, and thank you to our panelists and partners, and Alex and Brian. We couldn't have done this without you. Thank you so much. And if the PTSD folks want, if there's any questions for the PTSD folks too, they can come up and answer as well. Thank you. Doug?
Hi, I'm Doug Dagley from Infield Health. First of all, this is absolutely amazing. I mean, it really is, and it's kudos to you for putting all of it together. I think there's a lot of people in a lot of sessions that should be in this one. So this is great. My question, it's not really for me, but it's for someone who's going to ask me this question, and that is, oh my gosh, Open mHealth, that must be no data privacy and no data security. So can you just comment on that for a second?
So I also have our esteemed, I'm just, you know, alley-ooping this question to
as every good moderator should.
Yeah. Nice. So our co-founder, Deborah Enstrin, will answer that.
So thank you for that question, because if it doesn't get asked in public, we don't get to answer it. So while we expose this data to you because Alex and Brian were willing to be up here and share their data with you, normally this data is entirely private. So Open mHealth is about opening up the potential for these individuals to get their own data and hold it private and share it with their clinicians. The data is not open. The ability to capture that data and integrate it into meaningful health is what is open. So the code and the capability gets open. Let me also add that you might have said, oh no, so this means that I have to open source all of my proprietary software. It is not open necessarily in that way either. As an organization, what we do and the glue and the software that we put in GitHub is open source. But we work with all kinds of folks who are commercializing and have closed components to their software as well. And as has been proven many times in the history of the internet, you can have closed components with open APIs and open interfaces.
Great question. Thanks, Doug.
Hi,
Yes.
Another Doug, so all the Dougs come up and ask questions. Doug Goldstein, iConnecto. So my question is Aetna's CarePass competitive? It strikes me, because I asked the question after the talk, how much of your architecture, et cetera, is open? Well, we have an open API and anybody can develop on it, but a lot of it's built on our proprietary infrastructure, et cetera. So is this competitive with CarePass?
Ida, do you want to answer that? I'm not too familiar with CarePass, so. Ida is the other co-founder of Open mHealth.
That is a very good question. There are different approaches to openness and integration, and I think there are going to be parallel approaches. And so while other groups also have open APIs to more proprietary stacks, we have an open API to an open community that also allows the participation of proprietary components. So we have talked with Aetna. I think we're still in a discussion and exploration of what parts of even very closed stacks and closed proprietary approaches might touch part of our open approach. And I think our vision of mHealth is not that everything will become open mHealth or open in any sense, but that there are options and that apps that are being developed and solutions that are being developed, there will be choices made for each organization about which approach they want. And we want to make sure that there is an option which is mostly open that people can participate on their own terms.
So we're Linux?
Yeah, sort of.
We're the bazaar, not the cathedral. Thanks.
In addition to that question, I just want to introduce Josh Selsky, our Chief Software Architect. Cameron Ketchum, please stand up, guys, because you guys are the magic behind all of this. John Jenkins and Mark Schwartz, who have helped make Open mHealth really possible. Every single day they're working their butts off. Please. And Anna. Please stand up. She's really made this happen. She's my boss today. Thank you so much. But if you have any technical questions, harass them because they will give you all those nitty-gritty answers. Yes.
Pauline Balch, family physician, Kaiser Permanente. Just a quick question, and John, this is actually a heads up for you. Once people can see their results and see as they work, say, on their diabetes and their depression, they can start to see how they interact. How, if I'm really depressed, I'm not managing my diabetes. If I'm not walking, my depression gets worse. Can you foresee a Siri-like feature to this tool that starts to learn with you and said, gee, you didn't go on your walk today, and look what's going to happen to your sugar. Anybody want to talk about that? I know you do, John.
Aaron or John? Yeah, why don't you start, John, and then Aaron can follow up.
I'm not going to compete with John, so I'll let him take this one.
Go ahead, John.
So Pauline's a partner in crime, and I didn't ask her to hand me that on a silver platter. But yeah, the vision goes very much in that direction, and that is one of the most appealing things about the open modular architecture approach. Is what I can imagine very clearly is if you look at the disciplines that are involved in what you just saw in real software with real patients using it, you have clinical sciences, you have mobile technology, you have visualization technology, you have behavioral sciences, you have behavioral visualization. Those are all very distinct disciplines. And now Pauline is asking, well, what about the interactive voice technologies and the health coach avatars that are already coming to market? So what I can, and just a quick clinical data point, if you look at most diabetic patients who are chronically in poor control, the number one reason is depression. And you cannot get them in control until their diabetes in control until you effectively treat their depression. So you put together the kind of concert of applications that you just saw and begin to understand what it is that helps them get out of their depression so you can actually control their diabetes. So what I see to Paul Ann's question is I see the ability with, as Ida and Deborah characterize this, as a method for sense making. There's so much snake oil out there in the mobile health area. How do we make sense of what's actually working on? So I want to know if we see a correlation between diabetic control, depression, and which Pandora station that she's listening to. I want to be able to tap her on the shoulder and say, hey, you're on the wrong station right now, because I can see in your visualization of your mood and in your diabetes control that you're not in the upbeat space that you need to be in, and we're going to help you turn that around. So, answer to Pon's question is yes, and it is the open mHealth architecture that I think provides the profound opportunity to bring very disparate disciplines and components together in a sense-making forum where we can actually begin to understand answers to those kind of questions, and we're not going to get that from the 10,000 apps that are sitting alone in isolation in the App Store.
Okay, maybe I will add one.
Bravo. Aaron, please.
I can't touch John's experience or knowledge, but I will make a plea for talent, which is, John used the term snake oil, and I think there is unfortunately a lot of snake oil out there, and I worry about it being used by some of my patients. But I think a lot of people are afraid of the FDA and are so afraid of the FDA that they're veering away from trying to work on things like Paul Ann is asking about in terms of learning analytics from all of this data that we get and trying to work on solving real disease and veering into the wellness space. So if there are talented people out there who want to work on solving real disease and big data and analytics, please jump in.
Definitely. Any other questions?
Gordy Raup with Datawit. I want to follow up on that comment, asking the various app developers on the panel that have been involved with this, what do they think about the prospect of FDA regulation? Would that have a chilling effect on your work, or do you think that would enhance your viability as apps to have some sort of certification process?
Anyone from PTSD or want to answer that? And obviously,
maybe it's, I don't know, egotistical. But I think he who has nothing to hide has nothing to fear. We base everything that's built in my team and my office on science, on the best gold standards that we can find for, and all on evidence-based psychotherapies or evidence-based principles, at least. And I think if the FDA has a lot of people to shut down before they get to us. So from my perspective, we're doing the best that we can. We understand that this is a new frontier. Everything has to be built in an iterative fashion, and that as long as we're committed to progressively evaluating what we're doing and ensuring that we're finding, if not great outcomes, at least not, that we're creating something problematic for people, that we should be okay, right? First, do no harm, and that's kind of where we're at. I would say I may be the lone dissenter on the big data issue. I think we need to walk before we can run. I firmly believe in iteration. I don't believe that we need to integrate, diabetes, glucose scores with depression scores, with everything you bought at Amazon last month, with your mom's maiden name, and all the I don't think ultimately that is the most helpful direction right this second. I think we have a lot of questions to problems to solve between now and when we completely replace the wisdom of clinical providers with I don't actually think Siri's all that smart either, but with something that Siri's supposed to be doing. So I guess I'm a stick in the mud. I don't know when I turned 75, but there it is. It was this moment.
Actually, I'd love to hear from Karin. Actually, would you mind talking about that? I mean, Ginger.io just got KOSLA, Series A funding. You want to talk about that? As just got venture funded, so.
Yeah, we got venture funded, but I mean specifically to the question, I think it's a fair question. I think to the comment around snake oil, we came from academic roots, so we may be taking the long route, but the long route requires some amount of validation. It requires working with partners who are willing to do a real study. Maybe it's IRB approved. We've gone through that process on a number of occasions. The comment earlier around sort of making sure that you have the appropriate security protocols, Open mHealth makes it a whole lot easier to do that. We're focused on mobile sensor data right now, but are looking to integrate with other data sets. And I didn't get a chance to say this on the panel, but a big reason why we're really excited about being here is that we're a small team, now get the chance to grow because of the funding, but have to make tough decisions about integrating with all of these different sensors and incorporating that into our analytics platform. And this makes that easier, but fundamentally it comes down to proof. It comes down to proving that you can actually improve outcomes, reduce costs, connect patients to their providers, solve some material problem, so you can get paid for it. And for us, that's really the long route. It may take a course of a year, it may take more than that, but we're in it for the long haul. As the legislation changes, we'll have a better sense for what's required. But at the very least, right now, we're subscribing to make sure that the system can be HIPAA compliant, that we can meet the needs of our provider partners, so that they can offer the solution to their patients.
Great. Ida, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I wanted to make a point that speaks to FDA regulation, but actually is a broader point, which is, we all want to know whether something works, right? And we need to prove it to the FDA. We need to prove it to people who might purchase our app. We want to prove it to the hospitals who want to buy our solutions, to the insurance companies that we want to, offer our app on their offerings. And really, that's a question. I'm a clinician. I'm also a clinical researcher. And when you ask, does something work to improve health, that's a clinical research question. And there are a lot of methods that we have for that. You're probably familiar with the randomized clinical trial, where you take some people and randomize them and follow them for a long time and find out if something happens. And those kinds of methods have worked, for studying drugs, but it really doesn't work for the pace of mobile health research, right? In some sense, I think of it's the raw metabolic rate for what we're doing in mobile health. So the next iteration of Open mHealth, today you heard a lot about integration of partners, integration of data streams. Going to move next to something that's more challenging, but actually also very important, which is our notion of embedded evaluation. That some of the modules that we produce that aren't just processing or visualization or data storage, modules that allow us to do evaluation, to randomize, informed consent, outcomes assessment, structuring of protocols, whether it's an observational study, whether it's a A/B study, whether it's a delayed randomization study, an N of 1 study. All those things are components that you can mix and match. We want to represent outcome variables, so they're standardized. Julia talked about the post-traumatic stress disorder scale, the PHQ-9. They're standard clinical variables that we can use. They're standard clinical research methodologies that we can use. And we want to introduce that into the Open mHealth ecosystem so that everybody, not just academics, everyone can be more scientific in asking the question, does something work? And getting an answer to that has more scientific rigidity and validity to the point necessary. And then engage with the FDA about a discussion about what kind of rigorous data do you need. Do you need it to be very rigorous, less rigorous? We need to be pragmatic about asking and answering the question, does it work? And that's upon that basis is how we're going to improve our apps and our mHealth solutions.
Did anyone in the diabetes, no one was a comment or say anything? Okay. Any other questions? Yeah, come on up.
Yeah, I was just wondering how much customization or custom code had to be written for each study, and kind of related to this is, are you guys going to work on like general ontologies or data structures for different domains, and and let's say more generalized analysis that can then run on top of that, or if you could talk maybe a little bit about how a roadmap around that.
Sure. We'll answer the first question. Josh will answer the first question. Well, sorry, I'm calling because he's our chief software architect. And then maybe Ida can follow up about the ontology question. About sort of how much customization.
How much customization?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
How much custom software? Right, so there was a lot of software to be written, but some of it is very reusable, so that doesn't count towards the custom software. Would you say it's right that most of the custom software had to do with particular visualizations that had to do with the particular content of the data?
Yeah, absolutely. All the data streams that we were reading for each of these scenarios, it was quite simple, maybe 2 weeks worth of work. Most of the work went into design of the APIs that we designed and the visualizations themselves. Yeah, so not that difficult.
Yeah.
A little hard to quantify how much, but. So interesting about the payload IDs.
Yeah, no, so, no, we want to, I guess, accrete an ontology. We don't want to spend 10 years designing, every disease condition in existence because it will be out of date instantly. So we were very practical in our approach, and we designed the concept of a payload ID that maps to a very simple JSON schema using a schema language called Concordia that John Jenkins over there invented. And so that's it. Our approach is really simple.
I didn't know that John invented Concordia.
I did not know that either.
I learned something. No, we're not building ontologies. And no, we're not inventing data structures. What we're building through our architecture with payload IDs and Concordia is the ability for the community to use existing standards declaratively. So, for example, in the diabetes example, clearly we were pulling down glucose data, right? At this point, we did not standardize that data element. Okay, it was just glucose in our payload ID. But we're going to allow, and our method allows us to bind that data element to different standardizations, whether you want to use a LOINC code, whether you want to use SNOMED, whatever it is you want to use, you can make that binding, okay? And what that does is it allows people to choose the semantic binding that makes sense for their use case, and it may be more than one. Okay, data models is a different issue. So, for example, there's a glucose and then a unit, and then maybe where it came from. Is it serum glucose or CSF glucose? There are data models out there already, and we don't want to invent them either. And so I think we may be using nested payload IDs to allow people to declare the data model that they use. And indeed, it may be a data model that someone has defined as a reference. So we're not in the business of rebuilding anything. We want to enable the community to use existing standards, and then for the community to define which of those standards really work over time, through use. As for the issue of aggregation of data for analytics, and this is the whole big data vision, that comes down to whether the data can be made semantically interoperable. And there, again, it depends on, whether people choose to annotate and whether people choose to annotate with standards that other people are going to use. Really big problem, we're not promising that that's going to be possible, but to the extent that we can introduce standards and have a culture of standardization that tracks with an open culture that's really focused on evaluation and focused on the long goal, which is, are we really doing better for our patients? Are we really improving health? And through that, I think people will want to standardize, and then the analytics will fall from that. So it's a stepped process.
I just want to amplify one thing that Ida said, and encourage any of you that are developing apps in the clinical space to use existing ontologies and to use existing reference models, not to yet again invent your own, because there's been enough of that, and it'll cost you in the end run. It may save you time at the front end, but it'll cost you in the long run. The work that the ONC is doing in the S&I framework, further specifying ontologies as well as the consolidated CDA should be sufficient, and where you need to make an extension, but plug it into an existing ontology. And so the approach that mHealth is taking is exactly right, and the market is deciding, and ONC is very much assisting in that effort. So I don't think that should be the kind of issue that it has been up to this point in time, because there is increasing clarity around that. The other thing I want to mention is real quickly is this is not a hypothetical pie in the sky thing. We have a pilot we're launching with Karin on Ginger.io. We have a pilot that we're launching with Qualcomm with 2Net, and we'll be using the Open mHealth framework specifically so that we can have a framework for sense making and do the kinds of analysis so that we know what's working and what's not, and that is the virtue of operating within the space.
Well, on that note, our time is up, but thank you so much for coming to our session. Please come to our booth in 216. Tomorrow we'll be around for about half the day to answer any other questions that you might have. Talk to any of our panelists and team. And if you're in DC, come hang out tonight at room 11. So we'll be having drinks and, relaxing. So please, thank you again for being here, and we'll love to talk to you.